Rachel uninvited 25 family members from her wedding. Sometimes a wedding isn't just a celebration. It's a test of loyalty, of understanding, and of the invisible line between family expectations and personal freedom. This story begins with a simple dream. A young woman, after 2 years of planning, was finally about to have the wedding she truly wanted. Something unique, something her own, a Halloween-themed ceremony. But just 6 weeks before the big day, everything shifted. Rachel's mother and grandmother, who had known about the theme for years, suddenly called it satanic and demanded she change it. A small concern? No. It was the spark that ignited a full-blown family crisis. On one side, her desire to express herself on her most important day. On the other, the weight of tradition, image, and generations of unspoken rules. And when the pressure reached its peak, this bride-to-be made a choice that few would dare. She uninvited 25 family members from her wedding. Was it selfish? Or was it the only way to protect herself from a lifetime of quiet compromise? Let's take a deeper look into what really happened, and what it cost her. For 2 whole years, she poured herself into the vision. Not just a wedding, but her wedding. One that reflected her spirit, her creativity, her love for the offbeat and the magical. From the moment he proposed, she knew she didn't want a cookie-cutter ceremony in a beige banquet hall. She wanted something that felt alive, unique, memorable. And for her, that meant Halloween. The richness of autumn leaves, the glow of candlelight, the theatrical elegance of black lace and deep burgundy roses. It wasn't about horror. It was about wonder. She imagined guests in creative costumes, laughter echoing under chandeliers, a masquerade ball to end the night. It was, in many ways, her childhood love of fantasy meeting her adult life, full circle. So she got to work. She booked the perfect venue, an old historic estate known for its character and charm. But it wasn't easy. The waiting list was long, the deposit was steep, and availability was scarce. She had to fight to secure that date. Vendors were contacted a year in advance. The dress, custom designed to fit the Gothic elegance she dreamed of, took months to finish. Every candle, every invitation, every playlist, meticulously chosen. And for most of that time, the family said nothing. Her mother knew. Her grandmother knew. They had heard about the theme, seen the Pinterest boards, listened to her speak with excitement about vampire-inspired decor and vintage lantern centerpieces. No one raised a serious objection. Not until 6 weeks before the big day. That's when things began to unravel. It started with a phone call, her mother, hesitant at first. "Are you sure this is the kind of wedding you want? What will the guests think?" Then it escalated. Her grandmother said the word out loud. Satanic. A Halloween wedding, she said, was a disrespect to God. It was evil, demonic, an embarrassment to the family. And suddenly, the silence of 2 years gave way to a chorus of complaints. From aunts, cousins, distant relatives who barely knew her, but felt entitled to weigh in. Some said they wouldn't come. Others said they'd show up only if she toned it down. One even joked, "Is this a wedding or a seance?" That was the moment it hit her. This wasn't just about a wedding theme anymore. It was about control, about whether she was allowed to express herself fully or expected to shrink down to make others comfortable. And as the pressure built, she faced a choice that no bride should have to make. Please everyone, or protect the day she'd spent 2 years building from the ground up. For a long time, it felt like they were on her side. Maybe not with full enthusiasm, but with quiet acceptance. Her mother didn't protest. Her grandmother never questioned the Pinterest boards filled with dark florals and candlelit aisles. For nearly 2 years, the theme had lived in the open. No secrets, no surprises. But 6 weeks before the wedding, everything changed. It started like a tremor. Gentle, almost imperceptible. A hesitant question from her mother over the phone. "Are you sure? This is the image you want to put out? What will people think?" At first, she brushed it off. She'd heard whispers before. People don't always understand something outside the norm, especially when it comes to weddings. She reassured her mom. This wasn't a Halloween party with plastic skeletons. It was elegant, romantic, a celebration rooted in fall beauty and personal meaning. But that wasn't enough. The next call wasn't hesitant, it was angry. This time it was her grandmother. "This is evil," she said flatly. "You're inviting darkness into your marriage. We can't support something so unholy." It was no longer about aesthetics, it was about morality. The word satanic was spoken, and everything began to unravel. Within days, more voices joined the chorus. An aunt called to, lovingly, suggest a more God-honoring color palette. A cousin said he wouldn't feel comfortable bringing his kids to something so dark. Her sister, who had been a bridesmaid from day one, suddenly needed space and began ghosting the group chat. At first, it was disappointing. Then it became hurtful. Because it wasn't just that they disapproved, it was how they disapproved. Condescending tones, condemning language, and worst of all, the passive-aggressive calls disguised as concern. And when she stood her ground, when she calmly explained that this wedding had been planned with love and care, that it was about joy and creativity, not rebellion, they pushed harder. Her mom stopped speaking to her altogether. Her grandmother threatened not to come. But it didn't stop there. They began talking to others in the family, whispering, rallying support. One by one, relatives called to say they weren't sure about attending anymore. Some framed it as needing to think about it. Others were blunt. "We just can't support this." 25 people, 25 family members who once said, "We're so happy for you," now turning their backs, some quietly, others proudly, as if their absence would make her rethink everything. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not the theme, not the rejection, but the realization that their love was conditional, that for some people, family unity only exists when you comply. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was a power struggle, a subtle message, repeated in different words and voices. "We'll love you, as long as you stay in the mold." But she'd spent too long building a life outside that mold, and now she had to decide whether to dim her light or finally draw the line. At first, she cried. Not because she regretted the theme, not because she doubted her choices. She cried because she couldn't understand how love, real, unconditional love, could be so fragile. How the people who had watched her grow, who'd once cradled her in their arms, could turn away so quickly over candles and costumes. For days, she held out hope. Maybe they just needed time. Maybe cooler heads would prevail. She told herself, "They'll remember this is my day, they'll come around." But they didn't. Instead, the silence grew heavier. The group chats went quiet. Her sister removed herself from the bridesmaids' thread without a word. One aunt even sent a passive-aggressive message. "We all make mistakes in our youth, but some choices have consequences." It stung, deeply, because this wasn't about a mistake. This was her wedding, her joy, and what they saw as a phase or a rebellion was actually the most authentic expression of who she was, and slowly, something inside her began to shift. She stopped asking for understanding. She stopped explaining herself, because somewhere in the hurt she realized this wasn't just about this one day. It was about every future day, every family holiday, every conversation where she would be expected to shrink just a little, for the sake of peace. But peace at what cost? So she made a decision, not in anger, not in spite, but in clarity. She opened her guest list, and one by one, she removed the names of everyone who had chosen control over kindness. Everyone who had said, in some form or another, "We don't accept you unless you change." It totaled 25 people. 25 people she had grown up with, celebrated birthdays with, hugged at funerals. She didn't do it with joy, but she did it with resolve. And then she sent out a new round of invitations, digitally, with updated QR codes linked to a new guest registry. She informed the venue, only names on the updated list would be admitted. No exceptions, no last-minute changes. No, but we're family. Because if family could use love as a weapon, then it was no longer love. It was obligation, control, emotional debt disguised as tradition. The silence that followed was different this time. Not cold, but clean. The pressure lifted. The dread faded, and in its place came something unfamiliar, but powerful. Peace. She still felt the grief, still missed the people who chose distance over celebration. But now, she was no longer waiting for their approval. She had drawn a line, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. And for the first time in weeks, she could look at her wedding plans again without the taste of guilt. It would be beautiful, honest, joyful. Not because it followed tradition, but because it finally followed her. There's a strange kind of grief that comes when you choose yourself, especially for the first time. It doesn't roar like heartbreak. It doesn't scream like betrayal. It's quiet, lingering, a gentle ache in the chest that follows you into the silence after the storm. That's what she felt in the days after uninviting 25 members of her own family. Not regret, no, she stood by her decision, but loss. Not just the loss of attendance, the loss of illusion, the realization that some ties were weaker than she thought, held together not by love, but by expectation. She had always believed family was her safety net, the place she could land no matter how far she flew. But now she saw it clearly. Some nets are not there to catch you. Some are built to hold you down. For the first time, she allowed herself to mourn, not the absence of those relatives at her wedding, but the absence of emotional safety they had never truly offered. And in that mourning, she found something unexpected: clarity. She could finally see who had stayed, not out of convenience, not out of pressure, but out of genuine care. Her father, who had always been quiet in family politics, surprised her with unwavering support. Her fiancé, who never once asked her to back down, only to breathe through the pain. And her close friends, who picked up the slack, sewed last-minute costume accessories, and reminded her that family is not always blood. There was one moment, 3 nights before the wedding, when she sat alone in her nearly finished venue. Rows of dark wooden chairs lined up under strings of warm lights, the scent of dried lavender and eucalyptus hanging softly in the air. She looked at the altar, lit with lanterns, framed in deep crimson drapes, and whispered to herself, "They chose not to be here, but I still choose to show up." It was a quiet vow. Not the kind you make to a partner, but the kind you make to yourself. To no longer shrink for anyone. To no longer explain what doesn't need permission. That night, she slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Not because everything was perfect, but because she was no longer performing, no longer bending, no longer bargaining. She was simply present. The morning of the wedding, she stood in front of the mirror, lacing up her corseted gown, black velvet, rich and elegant, just as she had imagined, and she smiled. Not a forced, bridal smile, but something softer, a smile with roots. Because despite everything, the wedding would go on, not diminished, not dimmed, but luminous in its own strange, beautiful way. And maybe, she thought, that's what freedom feels like. Not loud, not defiant, just quietly, deeply yours. She walked down the aisle not with absence in her heart, but with presence. Every step forward was a quiet reclaiming, of joy, of voice, of self. No whispers behind her back. No eyes judging her bouquet of black orchids. Just the warm embrace of people who had chosen to be there, not out of duty, but out of love. In the soft golden light of that October afternoon, she didn't think about the empty chairs. She thought about the full ones, because sometimes it's not about how many people show up. It's about who shows up and why. And as she stood hand in hand with the person she loved most, she realized, family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up when it's inconvenient, who chooses love when it's not easy, who celebrates you even when they don't understand you. That day, she didn't just get married. She set a standard for the life she was stepping into, a life where love had room to breathe, where joy didn't have to be explained, where peace wasn't something to apologize for. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between being true to yourself and keeping peace with your family? Was there ever a moment where drawing a boundary felt like breaking a bond? Share your story in the comments. Let's create a space for honesty, for healing, and for honoring the quiet strength it takes to say, "This is who I am, and this is where I draw the line." Because sometimes, the hardest thing we'll ever do is choose ourselves, and still choose to love anyway.